Hello, my lovelies. Another chapter of Goblins of the Castle. Hope you're enjoying this series. I'd like to continue it. I'd like to make some more. Bruce Coville, Goblins in the Castle. Chapter 12, The Golden Collar. I stared at her in horror. You wanted me to let them out? She stopped laughing and leaned toward me, her hooked chin pointing toward my face. I have been working for the release of these goblins for more years than you can imagine, she hissed. Why? Her answer astonished me. Because we need them out here. The land is dead and lifeless without them. I don't understand. You have no way of knowing what things were like before the goblins disappeared, William, so you can't know what we've lost. But things were different then. The world around here was more joyous, the people happier, the land more bountiful. When the goblins were locked away, when their wild energy was imprisoned, much of that went with them. I was so intent on what she was saying that it wasn't until some time later that I realized she had called me by my name, even though I'd never mentioned it to her. But if they were good for things, why were they locked away? Come closer. It was only a few feet away as it was. When I hesitated, Granny Pinchbottom didn't say anything, just stared at me. After a moment, I stepped forward. She still didn't say anything. I knelt down. Now my face was just slightly below hers. Reaching out, she took my cheeks between her hands and stared straight into my eyes. That which is joyous, that which is lively, that which is free of fear is often most feared. The goblins had their kingdom underground, but most of them lived out here among the people. When a goblin attached itself to a house, it would care for it. Though it would often work minor mischief, it always did more good than harm, which is more than many humans can say. If the goblins occasionally let a child to play in the mud, and they did, they more often saved that child from genuine danger. What about the people they stole away to Goblin Land? The old woman snorted. Some people chose to go to Goblin Land, which is properly called Nilbog, by the way. Other people who couldn't understand such a choice decided it wasn't a choice at all and spread rumors that their neighbors had been stolen. Fear began to grow. People began to resent the goblins. She made a spitting noise, a sound of disgust. The Baron at the time, who was the grandfather of the Baron you know, had a blind heart. He didn't understand play, didn't believe in mischief, didn't know how to laugh. The goblins' pranks annoyed him beyond endurance, and he never realized that they were the ones who kept his castle spotless, the ones who polished his wood and shined his windows and tended his gardens with secret tricks that made them grow in a way his own gardener never could. After a great deal of study, and with help of a powerful wizard, he managed to lock them away. She shook her head, and her eyes looked pained. A great gloom fell over the land. At first, no one realized what had happened, for much of the good the goblins did was done in secret, usually at night, which was the time they liked best. But somehow the houses were never as neat, the gardens never as productive, the children never as safe as they had been. This was once a land of plenty. Now the village limps along, growing smaller every year because fewer children are born. That's why I have been working toward the goblins' release. But there was one thing I didn't count on, one thing I hadn't anticipated. The tone in her voice made my stomach tighten. What was that? She grimaced. Their rage. I should have expected it. When you imprison something, you change it, and the goblins have been changed. Are they evil now? Granny Pinchbottom shook her head. I don't think they're evil, but they're so angry. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Trouble is coming, big trouble, unless... She trailed off and stared at me. I could feel her examining, assessing me. Unless what? I asked, unable to keep the words inside, though I had feeling that silence might have been smarter. The goblins follow the example of their king. It's more than that. They are connected to him in a way that can only be called magical. The problem is that the king has gone quite mad as a result of what happened, lost his head altogether. I think if he can be cured, the others will follow. How can that be done? I have 3 things to give you, she replied, which wasn't quite an answer, but seemed to be leading in that direction. The first was the amulet, which will provide you with light in the darkest places. Here is the second. Reaching into the bag next to her, she withdrew a piece of cloth. When she shook it out, I could see that it was a cloak. Put it on, she whispered. I took it from her hands and stood. The cloak fit my shoulders as if it had been made for me. A golden clasp, shaped like an oak leaf, held it fast about my neck. Raise the hood. I did as she directed. To my astonishment, I disappeared. Hey, I cried. What happened? The cloak is working, she chuckled, rubbing her bony hands together. But I can't see myself. Of course not. You're wearing a cloak of invisibility. This is wonderful, I said, thinking of all the ways in which I could use such a thing. It's yours, if you agree to take on my mission. Again, she reached into the bag. This time she drew forth a band of gold about the length of my arm and an inch wide. It had a buckle on one end and 3 green stones in the center. Looking directly into my eyes, she whispered, I want you to fasten this around the neck of the Goblin King. Fingers trembling, I reached for the golden collar. Why don't you do this yourself? I asked. You know more about this kind of thing than I do. She smiled, showing me a few yellowed teeth. I'm just an old woman, she said, sounding pitiful. But not always, she shrugged. The truth is, I'm too powerful. The goblins would know I was coming before I got anywhere near the king. They have ways of sensing people like me. I sighed. What do I have to do? First, you should rest. Then, have something to eat. After that, I'll give you a map to Nilbog, and you can be on your way. That sounded good. I was terribly tired, but I couldn't rest if Igor was in danger. When I said something about that Granny Pinchbottom replied, "I don't believe the goblins will hurt him, at least not yet. Far more likely they will imprison him, possibly mock him. As for you, you'll be little help to anyone if you don't get some rest." Suddenly I felt a great weariness creeping over me. Was Granny Pinchbottom casting a spell on me? Considering how little sleep and how much trouble I had been in the last few days, it didn't take magic to explain my exhaustion. The mere mention of sleep might have been enough to remind my body and brain how tired they were. "That way," she whispered, pointing to a cot near the fireplace. I stumbled in the direction she pointed. Clutching Igor's bear, I fell onto the cot and slept like the dead. When I woke, I found myself lying face down in a pile of leaves. I sat up confused and frightened. What had happened? Where was Granny Pinchbottom? I looked around. As near as I could tell, I was in the clearing Fauna had led me to the night before. The only thing missing was the cottage. Beside me lay Igor's bear and the drawstring bag from which Granny Pinchbottom had taken the amulet, cloak, and collar. "Granny Pinchbottom," I called, "are you here?" No answer, save the wind moving through the leaves. Suddenly the clearing grew dark. Looking up, I saw thick clouds massing in the west. From the look of them, a big storm was coming. I opened the bag and peeked inside. The 3 items Granny Pinchbottom had given me were there, as well as some paper packets that turned out to contain food, bread, cheese, and even a sweet. Well, she was as good as her word. She had said that after I slept, she would feed me. She had also promised a map, which I found at the bottom of the bag. It was drawn in green ink on yellow paper. The clearing where I now stood was marked in the lower left-hand corner. I knew it was the clearing where I stood because it was labeled, "You are here." According to the arrows, I had to walk back the way Fauna had brought me the night before. At the next to the last stream we had passed, I was to turn and head for the waterfall. Thunder rumbled overhead. I glanced up. It wouldn't be long before the whole sky was a waterfall. Folding the map, I tucked it into my shirt, picked up the bear and the bag, and started to walk. As I stepped from the clearing, something ran out of the bushes and grabbed me by the leg. "Gotcha!" it cried in a squeaky voice. "Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha!" I screamed and shook my leg, trying to dislodge my attacker. It was no use. The little thing was fastened to me tighter than a fresh scab. I jumped around in terror for a minute, then realized 2 things. 1, it wasn't going to let go of me. 2, it didn't seem to be hurting me. It was holding on, but not biting or scratching. My heart still pounding. I stopped yelling and looked down. The creature clinging to my leg was about 1.5 feet tall. It had big yellow eyes and a big nose. A tail stuck out of its ragged little breeches, which were held up by a single suspender hooked over its left shoulder. Its large pointed ears flapped when I shook my leg. "Gotcha!" it cried, looking up at me. "What are you?" "Herky." "You're a Herky?" No. Herky is my name. Am Goblin I am. Fierce and bad. Bad and fierce. Why are you holding on to me? Herky gotcha. Yes, you've got me. But why do you want me? Herky bad, it cried, as if that answered everything. Cautiously, I reached my hands toward the creature, ready to draw them back if it made any sign of trying to bite me. It didn't. Grasping it around the middle, I pulled it away from my leg, then lifted it to the level of my face. "How bad are you?" I asked. "Very, very most bad," it cried in a high-pitched voice. "Herky, fierce, bad goblin. Fierce, sad, bad." "Aha! Why are you sad?" I asked, ignoring his attempt to correct himself. "Herky lost," he sighed. "Other goblins all gone back to Nilbog. Herky can't find it. Herky mad. Herky sad. Herky bad, bad, bad." "Herky hungry?" The little goblin clacked its teeth together, which I took to mean yes. Setting him down, I took out one of the packets Granny Pinchbottom had left me and handed him some bread. "Yum," he said eagerly, opening his mouth to take a huge bite. No sooner had he closed his mouth on the loaf than a look of dismay widened his yellow eyes, and he spit the wad of bread to the ground. "Patooey!" he cried. "Bad food. Food bad." "What kind of food do you like?" I asked, feeling rather annoyed at the loss of some good bread. Herky scrambled up my leg and peered into the bag. "Got lizards?" "No, I don't have any lizards. And get your face out of there," I added, grabbing him by the back of the neck and pulling him away from the bag. I don't know if you could tell what I had in the bag just by looking at it, but I didn't particularly want to have a goblin learn I was carrying a cloak of invisibility. "Yow!" cried Yerky as I pulled him away from the bag. "Yow, yow, yow! Mean boy! Mean boy, mean! Goblin, rude!" I replied, setting him on the ground. I was about to squat so I could talk to him face to face when it occurred to me that doing so would make it very easy for him to bite me on the nose. I stared at him for a moment. Was he an enemy or not? "Gotcha!" cried Herky, grabbing something from the leaves and popping it into his mouth. I squatted, but not too close. "My name is..." Before I could finish, Herky looked past my shoulder. "Yow!" he shouted. Then he disappeared into the bushes.